The signal did not come through any official channel. It did not have a header, a species identifier, or a frequency that any registered compact relay would carry. It came through the dead band, a slice of spectrum that nobody used because everyone agreed, decades ago, that nobody should. Ren Adler found it by accident while running a routine noise floor calibration on the comms array of UES Ironclad. He almost deleted it. He almost marked it as interference from a pulsar at the edge of the sector and moved on. That was the reasonable thing to do. The signal was faint, broken into pieces, and sitting in a part of space that the Veth Compact had formally designated as a containment zone 3 years before humanity even found this region. But something about the pattern stopped him. It was too irregular to be stellar noise, too structured. It repeated at intervals that did not match any natural source he knew. He pulled it into the deep pattern analyzer and let it run for 6 hours. When the result came back, Ren sat very still for a long time. It was not one signal. It was hundreds of them layered on top of each other and compressed into a single broadcast. Individual voices, different tonal ranges, different emotional textures, all pushing through the same narrow frequency band like water forced through a pinhole. The analyzer could not translate the language. It was nothing in the human database, but the structure was unmistakable. Call and response. Repetition for emphasis. The pattern of something being said again and again, because no answer had come. Ren walked to Dara Holt's cabin and knocked. He did not message her. He knocked. She listened to the file without speaking. Halfway through, she leaned forward and put both elbows on the desk. When it ended, she sat back and said, "How old is this signal?" Ren said the timestamp metadata in the compression suggested continuous broadcast for at least 3 years. Dara looked at the sector map on her wall display. The containment zone was marked in pale gray, which was the Veth Compact's color for do not enter. No reason was given on any public chart. The Veth had registered the zone through the Galactic Accord without a species disclosure, which was legal if the species inside had not yet achieved interstellar travel. It was the kind of thing that was technically allowed, and that nobody talked about in polite company. She sent the data to Admiral Suko Abe at Reach Station with a note that had exactly 32 words. Found this in the dead band inside Veth Containment Zone. Deep pattern analysis confirms multi-voice structured broadcast, continuous for 3+ years. Requesting clarification on compact policy before I decide what to do next. The Admiral replied in 11 minutes. That was fast for Abe, who was not known for fast replies. His message said, "I am already on the channel with the Veth ambassador. Do not move yet. Stand by." Dara stood by for 4 hours. The Veth ambassador's formal response came through Reach Station's diplomatic relay and was forwarded to Ironclad as a matter of record. It was 5 paragraphs long and used the phrase Sovereign Containment Authority 3 times. It said the signal was a known artifact of natural resonance in the zone boundary. It said human vessels had no standing in this matter. It said the compact appreciated humanity's diligence and encouraged the patrol vessel to log the observation and resume its assigned route. Ren read the response over Dara's shoulder. "Natural resonance," he said. That's what they said. Hundreds of individual voices in a structured repeating broadcast is natural resonance. That's what they said. Ren was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" Dara sent a second message to Admiral Abe. This one was shorter. It said, "They are lying. What are we going to do about it?" Abe did not reply in writing this time. He opened a direct voice channel, which was also unusual for him. His voice was calm in the way that things are calm just before they are not. He told her he had pulled the Accord registry for the containment zone. The Veth had registered it 41 years ago under a provision that allowed observation quarantine for per-contact species that had exhibited what the compact classified as extreme internal volatility. He said the Accord documentation listed no projected end date for the quarantine. He said the last Veth observation report submitted to the Accord had been filed 11 years ago. 11 years of silence from whoever was inside. Except for the signal and the dead band, which had been running for 3 years. I'm looking at 40 hulls sitting in dock right now, Abe said. Supply ships, carriers, 2 hospital vessels. The 4th expeditionary was due for a deep range patrol rotation anyway. Dara said nothing. Abe said, I'm going to send one more message to the Veth ambassador. I'm going to tell him we heard the signal and we are going to investigate. I will not ask permission. I will state it as a fact. And then I'm going to order the fleet to spin up. Dara looked at her sector map. The containment zone was 11 hours at cruise speed, less if they pushed the drives. I'll move Ironclad to the boundary, she said. We'll be waiting when the fleet arrives. Abe said, don't get shot at before we get there. She cut the channel and told Wren to get the crew to stations. The signal was still playing on the open speaker, hundreds of voices pushing through the dark, saying whatever they had been saying for 3 years, aimed at anyone who might be listening. Someone was finally listening. The Veth Compact sent 3 delegations in 6 hours. Not 3 messages, 3 separate groups of officials, each with a different rank and a different tone, as if they were hoping one version would land differently than the others. The first was formal and cold. The second was detailed and legal. The third arrived at Reach Station's meeting room with a tray of food and what Consul Preth described as an expression of good faith. Admiral Suko Abe sat through all 3 meetings and said very little. He had learned over a long career that the people who talk the most in a room are usually the ones trying to cover something. He let the Veth delegations talk. He took notes. He asked no questions until the 3rd delegation finished, and then he asked only one. How many Aaron are still alive? Preth looked at the 2 officials beside him. One of them answered, somewhere between 4 and 6 million. The number was uncertain because the Compact's observation drones had not been serviced in over a decade. The last full survey was 11 years ago. Abe wrote that number down, 4 to 6 million. He had already pulled the original quarantine registration. The pre-quarantine population estimate 40 years ago was 900 million. He did not say anything about that. He thanked the delegation and ended the meeting. Secretary Lyon Morse caught up with him in the corridor. She was Earth's civilian liaison on Reach Station, and she was very good at her job, which meant she understood that her job right now was to slow things down enough that nobody did something irreversible. She suggested a joint assessment committee. She suggested a diplomatic framework with the Accord. She suggested a 6-week review period. Abe told her the fleet had already started warming engines. She said, Suko, if we break a compact quarantine without Accord authorization. The compact filed that quarantine without a species disclosure, he said. That means there is nothing in the Accord record to say there is anyone inside that zone at all. We heard a signal. We are going to check it out. Morse knew that argument would not survive a full legal review. She also knew that by the time anyone conducted a full legal review, the fleet would already be there. She said, what do the Veth actually say happened to the Aaron? Abe told her what the 3rd delegation had explained with obvious discomfort in the meeting room. 70 years ago, the Aaron had fought a war, not a short one. It went on for decades and it did not end cleanly. By the time it stopped, large portions of their industrial base were gone, their orbital infrastructure was destroyed, and their population had dropped by more than 1/3. The Veth discovered them during the final years of the war. They observed. They debated. They classified the Aaron as exhibiting extreme internal volatility, the Compact's official term for a species too dangerous to make contact with. They placed the system under quarantine and came back every few years to check that the Aaron were not rebuilding space capability. They were not. They were barely surviving. Morse was quiet for a moment, and no one reviewed the quarantine in 40 years. There are 3 filed requests for review in the Accord record, Abe said, all from Veth minority voices, all tabled pending further observation data. The last one was filed 19 years ago. Morse pressed her fingers against her temple. The signal Wren decoded how many voices. The analyzer isolated 412 distinct sources before the compression made further separation impossible. It thinks there are more. 400 people found the same frequency and the same broadcast method and pushed a signal out through a containment zone boundary in a dead band that they should not have known existed, which means someone on the inside understood enough about how the zone boundary worked to find a gap in it. That was the part that Abe kept coming back to. 400 voices were one thing, but someone had been smart enough to find the crack in the wall and patient enough to keep pushing through it for 3 years while waiting for anyone to notice. The fleet was 40 hulls, supply ships, 2 hospital vessels, 4 engineering craft, the rest a mix of patrol and escort. It was more than a rescue mission carried in numbers. The Veth would understand the message clearly. This was not a probe. This was not an observation run. Humanity was going in with enough tonnage to stay. Preth found Dara near the docking ring before Ironclad undocked. He stopped her with a hand gesture she almost did not notice. He looked tired in a way that was different from the formal fatigue of the delegations. He said, "Do you know what you're going into?" She said, "Tell me." He said, "The Aran lost most of what they were in 1 generation. Not the war itself, what happened after. When you lose that much of your population and your infrastructure in that short a time, something breaks in the people who survive. Not physically. Something else. They stopped trusting anything outside themselves. They stopped building for the future. You may land down there and find that the rescue is the easy part." Dara looked at him for a moment. "Have you been to their world?" "No." "Then you don't know what they'll do." She pulled her jacket straight. "Neither do I, but sitting out here deciding for them is what got them here." She boarded and the Ironclad undocked 40 minutes later. Behind her, the fleet followed in a long, slow line, 40 ships moving through the border zone like a fist opening into open space, pointed at a gray world that had been waiting for a very long time. The first thing they saw was dust. Not the soft kind that settles on unused furniture. This was the kind that hangs in the air for decades after something large and hot has torn through a landscape and left nothing solid enough to hold it down. The Ironclad's sensor package punched through it and returned images that the crew looked at without talking for a while. Collapsed cities, road systems that ended in the middle of nowhere, leading from one ruined settlement to another. Agricultural zones gone wild or gone dead, depending on the region. And people, small clusters of them, concentrated near water sources and low ground, using buildings as shelter that had not been built for that purpose. Wren had spent the transit time working on the signal's language. He did not crack it. Nobody expected him to crack it in 11 hours, but he built a phonetic map and a basic tonal structure that gave him a rough idea of how the language worked, and that was enough to transmit a greeting that sounded like something instead of noise. He broadcast on the same deadband frequency the Aran had been using. No response for 90 minutes. Then a single short burst, not words, just a tone sequence. The same one repeated 3 times. Wren played it for Dara and said he thought it meant something close to say that again. He said it again. The response this time was longer, still not words he could translate but structured, question-shaped. He replied with sounds that he hoped communicated that he did not understand yet but was not hostile. That exchange went on for 40 minutes before anyone on the ground agreed to visible contact. Dara took the shuttle down with Parasanuri, Wren, and 4 others. She did not take armed crew. She thought about it and decided against it. The landing site was a flat area outside what had been a mid-sized city. Most of the buildings were intact at the skeleton level, walls up, roofs gone, interiors long since cleared for use as shelters, storage, workshops. A group of Aaron stood at the edge of the cleared area and watched the shuttle set down. They were bipedal, which was not a surprise, tall and narrow through the shoulders, with faces that were wider than a human face at the brow and came to a narrow chin. Their skin was the same gray-brown as the dust. Their eyes were set wide, and they did not blink at the same rate humans did, maybe twice a minute. They stood very still. One of them stepped forward. She was older than the others, and she was clearly older in the way that very hard years make a person old rather than just the number of them. She studied the shuttle, the humans, the equipment cases Parisa was already unclipping from the cargo rack. Then she looked at Ren. She said something. He did not understand it. He said his phonetic greeting. She said something different, shorter. He tried to match the rhythm of her response and clearly failed because two of the people behind her made an expression that might have been a reaction to a bad sound. Then the old woman, Asa, they would learn her name later, pointed at the equipment cases Parisa had set on the ground and said something else. Ren said, "I think she's asking what those are." Parisa knelt, opened the nearest case, and held up a portable diagnostic scanner. She pointed it at her own arm, pressed the button, let it run, and showed Asa the screen. The readout meant nothing to Asa, obviously, but Parisa pointed at her own chest, at the device, at the screen in a sequence that was readable in basically any body language that had ever developed on any world. Asa looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned and said something to the group behind her. Three of them went back into the city at a fast walk. Parisa looked at Dara. Dara said nothing. The three returned 10 minutes later with two people on a carried stretcher and a child who was walking but not well. Parisa was already moving before they reached her. She was not a person who needed a committee meeting to know when to work. Asa watched Parisa work on the first patient without moving. Ren tried to keep up a slow, careful tonal exchange with her, not information, just sound, just the ongoing message that he was still there and still not dangerous. Asa tolerated it. After a while she started correcting his pronunciation on certain sounds, which he took as progress. Dara sent the medical status up to Fleet. Confirmed surviving population in this settlement, multiple critical health cases, requesting immediate approval for med drop at these coordinates. The Fleet doctor on the hospital ship replied within minutes. Approval was not his to give, technically. He sent it anyway. Above the planet, the fleet was in standard orbit. 40 ships with their running lights on, moving in slow formation around a world that had not seen a working spacecraft in the sky for more than a generation. Asa stepped away from watching Parisa and looked up. She had seen the ships on her way out. She must have. They were visible in daylight as moving points of light against the haze. She said something to Ren. He tried his best. "I think," he said carefully, "she is asking if they are all ours." "Tell her yes." Ren said the phonetic thing he hoped meant yes. Asa looked at the ships in the sky for a long time. Then she sat down on the ground, not from weakness, just sat. The way a person sits when they need a moment to absorb something that does not fit inside the normal size of a day. The Galactic Accord emergency session opened with 4 species requesting the floor at the same time, which was unprecedented and also a bad sign. Secretary Lion Moore sat at the human delegation table and listened to the chaos settle into something that could be called an argument. The Veth Compact filed their formal complaint first. High Speaker Deleth presented it personally, which was unusual, and told Morse everything she needed to know about how seriously the Compact was taking this. The complaint was precise, legally detailed, and correct in every clause. Humanity had entered a registered sovereign containment zone without authorization. The zone was Compact territory under Accord Charter Section 9. The human fleet was in violation. Morse did not interrupt. She took notes on a paper pad, which she knew some of the other delegations found strange, and waited. 3 other species gave their reactions. Two of them supported the Veth complaint in formal language. One, the Haru, who had sent only an observer and not a full delegation, said nothing, which in Accord sessions meant more than it seemed. Then the Accord arbiter, a human named Gwen who had the rotation this cycle, and looked mildly uncomfortable about the timing, opened the floor to the human delegation. Morse stood. She did not present a counter-complaint. She did not argue the legal language of Section 9. She said she had a piece of evidence she wanted to submit for the record and asked permission to play it through the chamber's audio system. She played the signal. Not a cleaned-up version or an analyst summary. The raw file, the way Ren Adler had pulled it out of the deadband, hundreds of voices layered on top of each other, pushing through the narrow frequency gap, repeating the same pattern over and over in a language none of the species in the room spoke. It ran for 4 minutes. The acoustic of the Accord chamber meant it filled the room in a way that a recording played in an office never did. Nobody spoke when it ended. Deleth was the first to break the silence. He said the signal was within a registered containment zone, and its existence did not change the question of authorization. Morse said, "How long has the compact been aware of this signal?" Deleth said the monitoring systems had logged it. The signal was under evaluation. For how long? A pause. 9 years. Morse let that sit for a moment. Humanity found it 3 weeks ago. We went in 8 days after finding it. The compact found it 9 years ago and sent it to evaluation. She set her pen down. I don't have a legal counter to the Section 9 argument. The compact's rights over that zone are real. I understand that. What I'm asking the Accord to consider is the timeline. The signal has been broadcasting for 12 years. The last compact survey of the population was 11 years ago. The last review request filed inside the compact was 19 years ago. There is no version of this where the Accord can say it did not know something was wrong. The Haru observer spoke for the first time. The translation came through as a question. How many populations does the Accord currently have listed under sovereign containment zones? Nobody answered. That was also an answer. The session ran for 9 hours. Morse drank bad station tea and did not eat and kept her voice level throughout. She did not win on every point. The Veth complaint was not dismissed. It was tabled, pending a full historical review of the quarantine documentation. That was not a victory on paper, but a full historical review meant Accord investigators going through 40 years of compact internal records about the Aran, and everyone in the room understood what that would find. Deleth requested a private channel with Morse during a recess. They stood in a side corridor with no one else present. He said, "You understand that the quarantine decision was not made by the current administration." Morse said she understood. He said, "The voices who argued for contact inside the compact have been trying to reopen this for 2 decades. They could not move the consensus." "I know," Morse said. "I read the filed review requests." Deleth looked at the wall. "You moved in 8 days. We move fast when we think something is wrong. Is that a cultural trait or something you trained into your military structure?" Morse thought about it. "Both, probably. We don't have a clean line between them." Deleth said nothing for a moment. Then, "The Accord will not sanction you. I cannot stop the historical review. I would not try to stop it. The voices in my own government who want this reviewed have been waiting longer than they should have had to wait." He paused. "I want it on record that the compact is prepared to cooperate with relief operations." Morse said, "I'll pass that to Admiral Abe." She sent Abe a 1-line message from the corridor. "No sanction. Veth complaint tabled. They want to cooperate. Send me a list of what you need." Abe's reply came 40 minutes later and was not 1 line. It was a detailed supply request broken into priority tiers: medical equipment, agricultural tools, water processing units, communication relay components. He had clearly been writing it for days, waiting for the session outcome. At the bottom, he had added a note: Asa gave Parasa an Aran name today. Parasa says it means the one who works until the work is done. I am told this is a high compliment. Pass it along when you get a chance. Morse walked back into the Accord chamber with the supply list on her screen, and the sound of 400 voices still somewhere in the back of her head. Nobody told Chief Engineer Baz Akafer to start with the water. He figured it out on his own, the same day he landed, by watching where the Aran walked in the morning. They all walked the same direction at the same time, carrying containers. He followed them to a collection point at the edge of the settlement, a broken pipe that leaked into a stone channel that ran into a depression in the ground. People waited in line to fill their containers from the depression. Children stood at the back of the line. Baz spent an hour at the collection point asking no questions and taking measurements. Then he went back to his shuttle and started pulling parts. 3 days later, the settlement had running water in 6 locations. Baz had not slept much. He was not the sort of person who slept much when there was a fixable problem in front of him, and he found this environment had a lot of fixable problems. An Aran named Fessel was assigned to shadow him, more or less. Nobody formally assigned this. Fessel simply started following Baz on the second day, and nobody told him to stop. He was young, maybe 30 by Aran reckoning, and he had the specific look of someone who had spent years doing engineering with whatever was available rather than whatever was correct. He watched Baz work with the focused attention of a person who has been waiting for someone to show them something they already half knew. On the third day, Fessel stopped watching and started helping. He did not ask. He just picked up the other end of the pipe. By the end of the first week, Fessel had opinions. Loud ones, delivered in the mixed language shorthand that emerged between them, part Wren's phonetic translation work, part hand gestures, part pointing at things and making the face that meant this is wrong. He and Baz argued for 20 minutes about the routing of a water reclamation line through the northern sector. Fessel thought Baz's planned route was too exposed to temperature variation. Baz thought Fessel was underestimating the flow rate. They were both partially right. The final solution was neither of their original ideas. Baz sent a note up to Dara. The Aran engineer on my team is good. I need more of him. Are there others? There were. Once word moved through the settlement that the humans wanted to work alongside people rather than just deliver supplies and leave, the requests came in faster than the roster could absorb them. Aran, who had been maintaining broken infrastructure for decades with no replacement parts and no contact with the outside galaxy, turned out to have a very specific kind of expertise, not in what was ideal, but in what was possible. They knew what materials could substitute for what. They knew which structures were safe and which were one bad season from collapse. They knew where the water was, where the soil was still workable, where the old power conduits ran underground. Parasa's hospital expanded 3 times in the first month. She had started in a tent with 6 beds and a portable autoclave. By week 4, she had a cleared building with 40 beds, 2 Aran healers working alongside her human medics, and a list of cases that was still long but was getting shorter. The Aran healers had their own pharmacological knowledge from plants that grew in the region, and 2 of those plants turned out to treat conditions that Parasa's standard pharmaceutical kit handled badly. She sent samples to the fleet's science team. The science team sent back a request for more samples and 6 questions. Asa came to the hospital most mornings. She did not come as a patient. She walked through, checked the beds, talked to people, and then sat near Parasa's workstation for a while. She and Parasa had developed a working communication. Wren's translation tools were good enough now for direct conversation on most topics. Asa's questions were usually practical. How long does this treatment take? Can this person travel? What does this person need to eat? She was organizing information, the way someone organizes information when they are responsible for a population, and have learned not to waste time on things that cannot be changed. One morning Asa asked Parasa how many humans were on the planet. Parasa said about 300 on the surface at any given time, more rotating through from the fleet. Asa said, and above. 37 ships in orbit right now, 3 rotating home for resupply. Asa processed this. Do they all know about us, the humans who are not here? Parasa said, everyone knows. It was in every broadcast network within a week of us arriving. Asa said something that Ren's translation software rendered as, and they are not afraid. Parasa was not sure what the question was actually asking. She said, of what? Asa gestured vaguely at everything, the broken city, the dust, the sky. Of a species that did this to itself. Parasa thought about how to answer that. She said, we did things to ourselves too. Worse things, actually, before we had space travel. We nearly didn't make it. She paused. We're not afraid. We just didn't want you to not make it either. Asa did not answer right away. She looked at the patient in the nearest bed, who was sleeping. She had the expression of someone running an internal calculation that involved more variables than the question had suggested. After a while she said, in careful, still accented Ren-taught words, we have been alone for a very long time. Parasa said, I know. It is a strange thing, Asa said, to stop being alone. Outside, Boz and Fessel were arguing about load-bearing tolerances again, and it was loud enough to hear through the walls. Parasa thought that was probably the best sound the building had heard in 40 years. 6 months is not long enough to fix 40 years. Dara knew that going in, and she still found it harder than she expected, not the work but the leaving. Her rotation was over. A new captain was coming in with a fresh crew. That was how it was supposed to go. The fleet had scaled back to a standing support group of 12 ships, which was still 12 more ships than the Aran had seen in decades. The immediate crisis was over. What remained was the longer, slower work of a civilization, figuring out what it wanted to be after everything that had happened to it. She walked through the settlement on her last morning. It looked different. Not finished, it was nowhere near finished, but different. The first thing she noticed was that the walls in the main corridor had been repaired, not by her crew. The Aran had done it themselves, using the material knowledge Fessel had shared with others, working in the early hours when it was cool. Someone had painted something on the new section of wall. She could not read it. She took a photo to send to Ren for translation. He was staying. He had filed for the long-term contact assignment 2 months ago and been approved. She had not been surprised. He had started dreaming in Aran phonetics, which she knew because he had mentioned it with the mild alarm of someone noticing an interesting fact about themselves. Boz was also staying for another rotation. He and Fessel had a project list that he described as 2 years minimum if we push, and Dara believed him. Fessel had turned out to be one of those engineers who could look at a broken system and immediately understand what it wanted to do rather than what it was failing to do. Boz said working with him was like finding someone who already knew half your vocabulary and was building the other half in real time. Parasa had left 3 weeks earlier. Her replacement was good. Parasa had spent her last week writing a document that was 40 pages long, cataloging everything she and the Aran healers had figured out together: combined treatment protocols, plant-based pharmaceutical notes, notes on Aran physiology that no Veth survey had ever recorded because the Veth had never gotten close enough to ask. The document was already being used at the fleet's medical archive. A Veth medical researcher had requested a copy. Morse had approved the share without comment. The Accord's historical review was ongoing. It had been uncomfortable for the Compact in the specific way that reviewing your own records always is when your records show things you would have preferred stayed vague. 2 other containment zones had been flagged for review after independent signals teams rechecked old archival data with the new sensitivity parameters Ren's work on the Aran signal had established. Whether those cases were as severe as this one, nobody knew yet. The Veth, to their credit, had not fought the review. Delaeth had shown up personally to one of the Aran relief coordination sessions, which nobody had expected. He had sat in the back and listened for 2 hours, and then asked one technical question about agricultural zone restoration that was surprisingly specific. Morse had mentioned it to Abe afterward. Abe said it was the kind of question someone asked when they were trying to figure out how to help without being asked. Asa found Dara at the edge of the old landing site. She was carrying something small, wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Dara without a lead-up or a speech. Dara unwrapped it. It was a carved stone object, roughly cylindrical, smooth from handling except for a text scratched into the base. It was light and fit in her palm. "What does it say?" Dara asked. Asa said the Aran word first. Then in the careful English she had been building for 6 months. "We have a saying, old saying, before the war. When someone is lost and cannot find the way, another person goes and turns around, faces them so they can follow the face home." She touched the carved text on the base. "This is your name, in our language." "The one who turns around," Dara said. "Yes." Dara closed her hand around it. She did not say anything immediately. That seemed correct. Some things do not need an immediate response. After a moment she said, "Will you be all right?" Asa made the expression that Ren had classified as the Aran equivalent of a dry laugh. "We have been not all right for 40 years. We are better at it than you are." Then, more quietly, "Yes, we will be all right." The shuttle was waiting. Dara boarded it with the carved stone in her jacket pocket and the photo of the wall text on her screen, which Ren had already translated by the time she lifted off. He had sent just the translation, no comment. The wall said, "They came when we called." 3 months later, the Aran submitted a formal application for Galactic Accord Observer status. The application was 40 pages of careful Accord Standard language, written by a team that included 2 Aran scholars, Ren Adler, and 1 Veth legal advisor who had apparently volunteered without being asked. It was co-signed by 38 human ship commanders and seconded by the Veth Compact. The vote was not close. Nobody called it a miracle. It was just the next thing that happened, in a chain of things, that started with a faint signal in a dead band that a comms officer almost deleted on a routine night shift. Nobody celebrated loudly. There was too much work still to do. But in a settlement on a gray world, Fessel painted something else on the wall, and Ren translated it without being asked. It said, "We are no longer only us.